Okay, this is the practice with adding and subtracting positive and negative numbers. So we're going to start real easy, and then we'll do some of the tougher ones, and then the rest will be on you guys to try on your own. So in this first example, we have a negative 2 plus 3. What you guys need to remember is anytime you have different signs, in this case, this 2 is negative, this 3 is positive because it's plus a positive 3. Whenever there's no sign in front of your number, okay, or a plus sign in front of it, it is a positive number. So when you have a negative number and a positive number, those are different signs. You always subtract them. So we take the larger number, which is 3, and we subtract the other number from it. So the smaller number from it. So we take 3 minus 2, and that gives me 1. So I know my answer is 1, okay? But now I have to ask myself, is it a positive 1 or a negative 1? And that depends on which of the numbers was larger. This 3 was bigger, so my answer is going to be the sign of whatever the 3 was. So the 3 was positive, so my answer is a positive 1. Let's do the next one. Let's do number 2. So in number 2, we have negative 14 plus a negative 7, okay? Now, whenever you have plus negative 7, that's the same as just minus 7. But what I really care about is what are the sign of both of my numbers. The sign of the 14 is negative, and the sign of the 7 is negative. This is a case where we have both of my values are negative, so we have the same sign. Whenever you have the same sign, you add those numbers together. So we're going to take 14 and we're going to add 7 to it. 4 plus 7 gives me 11, bring up the 1, and 1 plus 1 gives me 2. So my answer is 21. But if both of your values are negative, right, when you're adding them together, you do not get a positive number. You get a negative. And let's think about that. Let's say whenever I see a negative, I think of like a negative bank balance. So if you owe the bank $14 and then you borrow another $7 from the bank, you have to think about when you're borrowing, you're going further into debt, right? So you owe the bank then $21. So you're at a deficit of 21 bucks. Think about it as your friend lending you money. Your friend's already lent you 14 bucks. When they lend you another $7, you now owe them $21, okay? Until you pay them back, okay? Once you start paying them back, then you're adding positive numbers to the negative 21, and your negative value becomes smaller, okay? All right, let's do number 5, and we'll do number 6 as well, okay? So in number 5, we have negative 8 minus a negative 2. Whenever you see minus a negative, two negatives in front of each other, okay? We're technically saying this is negative 1, and you can multiply it by the negative 2. So a negative in front of a negative will eventually give you a positive number. So this can be changed into negative 8. Negative 1 times negative 2 gives you positive 2. Now we look at, okay, what are the signs of my two numbers? The sign of the 8 is negative, and the sign of the 2 is positive. So we have different signs. When you have different signs, you always subtract, okay? So we're going to take the 8 and subtract 2. I always take the larger number, okay? Number in terms of like number without the negative. So 8 is larger than 2. And I subtract the smaller number from it. So I take 8 minus 2 and I get 6. But remember, the sign of the larger number will be the sign of your result. So the 8 was the bigger number and the 8 was negative. So this is the answer to this is negative 6. Let's do one more. Let's do number 6. We have a positive 5 plus a negative 8. So a positive 5 plus a negative 8. Positives and negatives, we subtract. because they're different signs. Okay? Now, the 8 is the larger number, okay, if you ignore the negative. So we do 8 minus 5. Always subtract the smaller number from the larger one. 8 minus 5 gives me 3. Now, remember, you have to follow the sign of that larger number. The larger number was 8. It was negative. So my answer is negative 3. Okay. Let's do one where there's 3 numbers. Okay, so let's do, for example, number 14. Okay. Whenever you're adding or subtracting 3 numbers from each other, okay, you just follow from left to right. So we're going to do 15 and we're going to subtract 13 from it. 15 minus 13 gives me a positive 2 because the 15 was the larger number. And then we're adding 2 to that result. So now we're doing 2 plus 2, which gives me 4. So the answer here is positive 4. Moving on to the second page. Let's do one decimal problem and let's do one fraction problem, okay? We're going to go ahead and do number 28. Same thing, we've got 3 numbers, okay? So we're going to take 1.7 and we're going to subtract negative 0.8 from that 1.7. Now, remember, you have to take this negative and you have to distribute it to the negative 0.8. A negative times a negative, we're going to rewrite this as 1.7 plus 0.8 plus 4.013. Because remember, that negative, right, gets multiplied. It's technically negative 1, and you multiply it by negative 0.8. So now we're adding 1.7 and 0.8. Whenever you're adding decimals, you have to make sure that you line up the decimal. So we're going to write 1.7. We're adding 0.8 to it. 1.7 plus 0.8. You add the 7 and the 8, you get 15. So bring down the 5, bring up your 1. 1 plus 0 gives you 2. And now all you have to do is take that decimal and bring it straight down. So your answer is 2.5. So we have 2.5 when we combine these two, but we're still adding 4.013. Make sure you line up your decimals when you add these two. It's going to be 2.5 plus 4.013. Notice how my decimals are lined up. Now I just add them. Now, 2.5, you can always add zeros after your decimal, okay, if your numbers don't match up. So we add a 0 here, we add a 0 here. 0 plus 3 is 3. 0 plus 1 is 1. 5 plus 0 is 5. And 2 plus 4 is 6. So I bring down my decimal, and my answer is 6.513. Okay, and then let's go ahead and do one of the fraction problems. I would like to do number 31, okay? Number 31, you have negative 1 over 5 plus 7 over 4. Now, when you're adding or subtracting fractions, you always have to remember that you need a common denominator. Now, the denominator is the number on the bottom of your fraction. Right now, I have a 5 and I have a 4. Those don't match, so I do not have a common denominator. So what I need to do is figure out, okay, what can I do to both of these denominators so that they'll match? And typically, there's nothing you can multiply 4 by to match 5, and there's nothing you can multiply 5 by to match 4. So what I usually do is I multiply them by each other. So I take this 4 and I multiply it by 5, and I take this 5 and I multiply it by 4. Now, when I do that, right, I'm going to get 20 and I'm going to get 20. It'll always match as long as you multiply it by the other number, okay? Now, part of multiplying your fractions, you have to multiply the same thing by the numerator, okay? So if I'm going to take this 5 and multiply it by 4, I have to take this 1 and also multiply it by 4. And if I take this 4 and multiply it by 5, I have to take this 7 and also multiply it by 5. Because this is technically saying that we're multiplying by 5 over 5, which is just 1. And when you multiply by 1, you don't change your number at all. We don't want to change what we're adding together. We just want to make it so we have the capability of adding these two fractions together. So you can't change the numbers at all, okay? You can only manipulate what they are, what the fraction looks like, okay? You can't actually change the numbers. Okay, so we're taking the 1 and we're multiplying by 4. So it's going to be negative. 1 times 4 is 4, and 5 times 4 is 20. Then we have plus 7 times 5 is 35, and we have 4 times 5, which is 20, okay? Now you'll notice we have a common denominator. We have a 20 over here and a 20 over here. What you do when you add these fractions together is you only add or subtract their numerators, okay? Now, the first fraction is a negative, and the second fraction is a positive. It's a negative 4 and a positive 35. When you have negative 4 plus 35, you're going to subtract these two values. So we're going to take 35 and we're going to subtract 4 from it. When you do this, you get 31. Now, follow the sign of the larger number. So it's going to be positive 31 over 20. And then you always want to look to simplify your fraction. So always look, does 31 have any factors that are in common with 20? And the answer is no, so this is our simplified answer. If you want to change it into a mixed number, okay, just ask yourself, how many times does 20 go into 31? And the answer is 1 time. And then subtract 20 from 31, and you get a remainder of 11. So you have 11 over 20 left over. So 1 and 11/20 is the equivalent of 31 over 20. Okay? All right. That's it. That's all I wanted to do with you guys, okay? Now, go ahead and try the rest of the problems. The answer, good luck, have fun. Are in the back of the worksheet.